My son's wife said, "Choose, either me or your mother." He chose her. I left silently and canceled all my payments for his mortgage. The next morning, he was standing at my doorstep. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Dorothy Callahan, and I was 63 years old when I learned that love, without boundaries, is not love at all. It is an open door that the wrong people will walk right through. I had lived in my house on Maple Creek Drive for 31 years. The same house where I raised Kevin after his father left when Kevin was 7. The same house where I painted the kitchen 3 times because I could never quite decide between cream and ivory. The same house where I cried alone on the night Kevin left for college, and then cooked a large pot of chicken soup I didn't need just to have something to do with my hands. Kevin was my only child. I want you to understand what that means before I tell you the rest. When you have only one, every milestone becomes enormous. His first steps, his first broken bone, his first heartbreak. I carried all of it with him. And when he came to me at 31 years old and said he'd found the woman he wanted to marry, I cried happy tears right there in my kitchen. Her name was Brittany. She was 30 years old, quick with a smile and quicker with an opinion. She had sharp green eyes and a habit of tilting her head when she spoke to you, as if she were genuinely listening. I thought at first that it was warmth. Later, I understood it was calculation. I liked her in the beginning. I want to be honest about that. I brought her flowers the first time Kevin introduced us at a restaurant in town. I invited her to Thanksgiving, 3 weeks after they started dating. I gave her my mother's cornbread recipe, which I had never written down for anyone. I tried. I genuinely tried. But Brittany had a way of making rooms smaller. When she entered my kitchen, it was no longer quite my kitchen. When she sat in the living room, the furniture seemed to rearrange itself around her preferences. Small things. The kind of things you cannot complain about without sounding unreasonable. Dorothy, do you really need to call Kevin every Sunday? We're trying to establish our own routines. Dorothy, I hope you don't mind. I rearranged the guest room when we visited. The feng shui was completely off. Dorothy, Kevin mentioned you gave him money again. We'd appreciate if you'd run things like that by me first. I ran things by her. I adjusted. I apologized when I couldn't even name what I had done wrong. I told myself this was what modern mothers-in-law did. You stepped back. You made space. You were grateful for whatever portion of your son's life you were permitted to occupy. Then came the house. Kevin and Brittany wanted to buy a home in Clarksville, a 3-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage and a backyard large enough for the children Brittany said they would have someday. The price was $387,000. They had a down payment. They had Kevin's income from his project management job. What they did not have was enough to satisfy the bank's comfort with their debt-to-income ratio. Kevin came to me on a Tuesday evening. He sat in the same chair his father used to sit in, and he asked me quietly if I would co-sign the mortgage and contribute $1,100 a month toward the payment. He said it would be temporary, 2, maybe 3 years, until they were more established. I said yes. Of course I said yes. What was I going to do? Watch my son lose the house he wanted? I had the savings. My own house was paid off. I could afford it. And if I am being truthful, I believed that helping them build a life together would build something between Brittany and me as well. Shared investment. Common ground. For 14 months, I paid faithfully. Every first of the month, $1,100 transferred directly to the mortgage account. I attended their housewarming party and brought a gift. I babysat their rescue dog when they took a vacation to Charleston. I painted their nursery when Brittany announced she was pregnant, then quietly repainted it when she changed the color scheme without telling me. And then, on a Saturday afternoon in October, Brittany called me into the living room of the house I was helping to pay for, sat down across from me with her hands folded in her lap, and said, "Dorothy, I think it's time we had a conversation about boundaries. Kevin and I have talked, and we feel like you're too present in our lives. It's affecting our marriage, family. So I'm going to need you to make a family. So I'm going to need you to make a choice. Either you respect our boundaries completely, meaning you stop dropping by, you stop calling without scheduling first, you stop inserting yourself, or Kevin and I are going to need some serious distance." She paused. "What I'm saying, Dorothy, is that Kevin needs to choose his old family or his new one." The room was very quiet. I looked at my son. He looked at Brittany. And in that long, agonizing silence, I understood that the choice had already been made. He chose her. I picked up my purse. I said nothing. I walked out the front door of the house that my $1,100 a month was helping to keep over their heads. I drove home on autopilot, my hands steady on the wheel while everything inside me came apart. I made myself a cup of tea I did not drink. I sat in the dark of my kitchen on Maple Creek Drive, and then I began to think very clearly. I did not sleep that night. Not really. I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around me, the small creaks and sighs of a structure that had stood through 30 years of my life. I thought about Kevin as a boy. I thought about the first time he'd scraped his knee and how I'd held him while he cried. I thought about driving him to his first job interview, how nervous he'd been, how I'd told him in the parking lot that he was more capable than he knew. And then I thought about him staring at the floor while his wife gave me an ultimatum in the house I was paying for. By 4 a.m, grief had begun its slow conversion into something more useful. I got up. I put on the kitchen light. I made coffee. I sat at the table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I began to write down numbers. 14 months of payments at $1,100 per month. That was $15,400 I had contributed to Kevin and Brittany's mortgage. In addition to the cosign, which meant my credit, my financial reputation, my name was legally attached to that property. If they missed a payment, it would appear on my credit report. If they defaulted, I could be held responsible for the balance. I was not a generous grandmother sending birthday checks. I was a financial partner in their home, without a single legal protection in return. I had no agreement in writing, no promissory note, no clause specifying what would happen if our relationship deteriorated. I had handed over $15,400 and my credit standing on the basis of love and the assumption that family meant something. Was I foolish? Yes. I will admit that without shame, because admitting it was the first step toward doing something about it. The second thing I wrote down was simpler. What Brittany had actually said to me. I wrote it from memory, word by word, as accurately as I could reconstruct it. Either you respect our boundaries completely, or Kevin and I are going to need some serious distance. She had framed it as a boundary. But what it was, in practical terms, was a demand that I continue to fund their lives while accepting exclusion from them. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I wrote, "They cannot have both." That was the beginning of the plan, not revenge. I want to be precise about that. I am not a vindictive woman. I believe in consequences, not cruelty. What I understood, sitting in my kitchen at 4 a.m, was that I had been operating under an imbalance that I alone had the power to correct. Brittany had given me a choice: comply or accept distance. She had not considered that I had a choice of my own. She had not thought through the mechanics of what would happen if I simply stopped. If I withdrew my monthly payments, the mortgage would become $1,100 harder to manage every month. Kevin's income was good, but not so good that the gap would be painless. They had a baby on the way. Brittany had cut back her hours at the marketing firm where she worked. The math was not comfortable for them without me. More significantly, I was a co-signer. That was a legal relationship, not an emotional one. Emotions, Brittany had made clear, were subject to her approval. But the bank did not care about her approval. The bank cared about documentation. I wrote down 3 things I needed to do. First, speak to a financial attorney about my rights and exposure as a co-signer. I needed to understand what I could and could not do without damaging my own financial standing. Second, contact the mortgage servicer directly and explore my options regarding the co-signer status. Third, document everything. The payments I had made. The date of Saturday's conversation. Everything Brittany had said. Kevin's silence. All of it. Was I afraid? Deeply. The fear was not of Brittany, though she was formidable in her way. The fear was of losing Kevin permanently. Of taking an action that would push him further into her orbit rather than pulling him back toward clarity. Every mother who has watched a child be absorbed into a damaging dynamic knows that fear. You pull too hard, you lose them faster. But I also knew this. I had already lost him on Saturday afternoon. He had sat in a chair and said nothing while his wife handed me an ultimatum. Whatever I was going to lose, I had already begun losing it long before I made any decision. Sky was beginning to lighten at its edges. The sky was beginning to lighten at its edges, gray and uncertain, the way October mornings are in this part of the country. I watched it for a while. Then I picked up the phone and made an appointment with an attorney named Patricia Greer, whose office I had driven past 100 times on my way to the grocery store. The next morning, Sunday, Kevin appeared on my doorstep. He looked like he hadn't slept either. That, at least, was something. He stood on my porch with his hands in his jacket pockets, his shoulders slightly drawn in the way they always were when he was ashamed of something, a posture I recognized from when he was 14 and had dented the car. The morning was cold. I could see his breath. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I looked at him for a moment. This man who had once been the boy I raised. This man who had sat in silence while his wife issued demands. I stepped back and let him in. We sat in the kitchen. I did not offer coffee, which was, for me, a significant statement. Kevin noticed. He folded his hands on the table and looked at them, then at me. "I'm sorry about yesterday," he said. Brittany was frustrated. She didn't mean it to come out so harshly. "How did she mean it to come out?" I asked. He didn't have a good answer to that. He said they loved me. He said Brittany was under a lot of stress with the pregnancy. He said they just needed some structure. He said structure and boundaries and communication so many times that the words lost their shapes entirely. I listened. I did not argue. I did not cry, which seemed to unsettle him more than crying would have. When he finished, I said, "Kevin, I hear you. I need a few days to process things." He seemed relieved by that. He probably thought process meant I would soften, come around, agree to Brittany's terms. He hugged me at the door, a quick, uncertain embrace, and drove away in the direction of the house I was helping him pay for. I watched his car until it disappeared. Then I went inside and called Patricia Greer's office to confirm my Monday appointment. Patricia Greer was in her late 50s, compact and precise, with silver-framed glasses and the kind of calm that comes from 20 years of watching families in conflict. Her office smelled like coffee and old paper. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You're a co-signer," she said. That's different from a co-borrower in some respects, but your name is on that mortgage. Your credit is exposed, and your voluntary monthly contributions. You have no written agreement? Nothing, I said. Stop at any time. That's your legal stop at any time. That's your legal right. She paused. Stopping will create financial pressure on them, but it won't remove you from the cosigner liability automatically. That requires either refinancing the loan without you or a formal release from the lender, which the lender grants only if the primary borrowers qualify on their own. Do they qualify on their own? I asked. Based on what you've described, Brittany reducing her hours, the new baby coming, it's unlikely they'd qualify for a refinance right now without a cosigner. She looked at me steadily. Which means if they want you off the loan, they'll need to either increase their income significantly or sell the house. I sat with that information. It was not comfortable, but it was clarifying. Patricia helped me draft a formal letter to the mortgage servicer, flagging my cosigner status and requesting documentation of my rights. She also advised me to begin a paper trail. Every payment I had made, every communication with Kevin and Brittany, everything dated and saved. I drove home from Patricia's office with a folder of notes and a feeling I could only describe as the return of my own feet beneath me. It was 2 days later that I received the evidence I had not been looking for, but could not ignore. My neighbor, Carol Whitfield, called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Carol was not a gossip. She was a retired school teacher who chose her words carefully, and so when she hesitated before speaking, I knew what she said next would matter. Dorothy, I don't know if this is my business, but I saw Kevin and Brittany last night at the Riverside Grill. They were with another couple, and I wasn't trying to overhear, but it was a small space. I heard Brittany telling the other woman that once they got the house settled in their names, they were going to push for Kevin to reduce contact with you entirely. She called you. Carol stopped. What did she call me? I said. Carol's voice was careful. She called you a financial resource they were done needing. The kitchen was very still. She said that once Brittany's father co-signed instead, they'd have more flexibility. Her father had apparently already agreed in principle. They were just waiting for the right time to transition. I thanked Carol. I hung up. I sat in the stillness of my kitchen. A financial resource they were done needing, not a mother, not a person who had given 14 months of payments and her name and her credit and her Sunday dinners and her mother's cornbread recipe. A resource, temporary, to be replaced by a more convenient one once the infrastructure was in place. The plan was no longer about consequences or clarity. The plan was about survival. I called Patricia Greer's office and left a message. Then I sat down with my legal pad and rewrote the plan from the beginning, this time without sentiment. I stopped the payment on the 1st of November. It was a simple thing, mechanically. I logged into my bank account, found the scheduled transfer, and canceled it. $1,100 that would remain in my account instead of flowing silently into the house on Clarksville Road. I sat looking at the screen after I did it. There was no dramatic feeling, just a quiet solidifying, like concrete setting. I had already sent a certified letter to the mortgage servicer, written with Patricia's guidance, stating that I was a co-signer on the loan and was formally requesting information about the co-signer release process. The letter was factual and dry and gave nothing away. It simply established that I was aware of my rights and beginning to exercise them. Patricia had advised me to keep communication with Kevin and Brittany minimal until I had clearer legal footing. I agreed. I said nothing to Kevin when he texted on Tuesday to say he was thinking of me. I said nothing when Brittany sent a stiff, 3-line message on Thursday saying she hoped we could move forward productively. I read both messages, saved screenshots of them, and returned to my living room. The mortgage servicer's response arrived by mail on November 8th. It confirmed that a co-signer release was possible, but would require the primary borrowers to reapply and qualify independently. The letter also noted that any missed payments during the process would affect all parties on the loan. That was the piece I had been waiting to understand. It arrived on a Friday. On Saturday morning, Kevin called. His voice was different from the Sunday he'd appeared on my porch. That day, he had been ashamed. This day, he was tight, controlled, with something hard underneath. "Mom, the payment didn't come through." "No," I said. "It didn't." A pause. "Was that a mistake?" "No," I said again. Another pause. Longer. I heard Brittany's voice in the background, low and insistent, and then Kevin said, "Can we come over and talk about this?" I said yes. I thought it was important that they come to me, to Maple Creek Drive, to my kitchen, not theirs. They arrived at 11. Brittany walked in first, which told me everything about how the conversation had been choreographed. She sat in the chair across from me and did not take off her coat. Kevin sat beside her, slightly behind, the same posture as the last time. "Dorothy?" Brittany's voice was the same smooth instrument it always was, but there were strings pulled tight beneath it now. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Kevin and I want to resolve this." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. She blinked. "You missed the payment." "I canceled it. It won't be coming." The smoothness cracked, just slightly, at the edges. "Dorothy, we have a mortgage. We have a baby coming. This is not the time for whatever point you're trying to make." "I'm not making a point," I said. "I'm making a decision. You told me to respect your boundaries. I'm respecting them. My financial involvement in your household is, I think, a boundary issue." Kevin leaned forward. "Mom, come on, that's not what she meant." "Kevin," I said quietly, "what did she mean?" He didn't answer. Brittany's tone shifted then. The warmth drained away entirely, and what was underneath was much less pleasant. "Let me be direct, Dorothy. You're a co-signer on that loan. If you stop paying and we miss a payment, it affects your credit too. You'd be damaging yourself." There it was. The threat, dressed up as concern. "I'm aware," I said. "I've spoken to an attorney." Something moved across Brittany's face. Surprise, quickly covered. "What attorney?" "Patricia Greer. She's been very helpful." "You—" Brittany stopped, recalibrated. "Dorothy, this is family. You don't bring attorneys into family matters. You brought ultimatums into family matters," I said. "I'm just matching the register." Kevin stood up. He wasn't angry, exactly. Kevin rarely did anger cleanly, but he was agitated, color rising in his face. "Mom, if you do this, it's going to cost us. It's going to be a serious problem. Is that what you want? To cause us problems?" I looked at my son. My one child. The person I had built my life around for 30 years. "What I wanted," I said, "was to be treated like your mother. What I got was financial resource. I'm adjusting accordingly." The silence that followed was very complete. Brittany stood. Her jaw was tight. "We'll figure it out without you," she said. "And when we do, don't expect to be welcomed back." "I'll manage," I said. They left. I heard the front door close. I heard Kevin's car start in the driveway. I stood at the kitchen window and watched them pull away. Then I sat down, put my face in my hands, and allowed myself 10 minutes to shake. 10 minutes exactly. I timed it. After that, I called my travel agent and booked 4 nights at a small inn in Vermont that I had always meant to visit. The foliage would be past its peak by November, but that was all right. I needed cold air and silence and a bed in a room where no one knew my last name. I left on Monday and came back on Thursday, carrying a small jar of maple syrup, and the steadiest feeling I had known in months. The drive back from Vermont was quiet in the way I had needed it to be. 4 days of walking through cold air and eating soup in a small dining room and sleeping without a phone on the nightstand. I had thought about Kevin, of course. A mother does not stop thinking about her child because she leaves the state. But I had thought about him the way you eventually learn to think about pain, acknowledging it without letting it run you. I pulled into my driveway on Maple Creek Drive on Thursday afternoon. The maple tree in the front yard had lost most of its leaves. The house looked exactly as I had left it, ordinary and solid and mine. Kevin called that evening. I let it ring. He called again Friday morning. I let that ring too. On Saturday, he called without Brittany. I knew because his voice had a different texture. Quieter, the defensive layer stripped away. He sounded more like himself, or like the self I remembered. "Mom, I really need to talk to you," he said. "Just us." I considered it. "Okay," I said. "Sunday, here, 2 o'clock." He arrived precisely at 2, which told me Brittany had coached the punctuality. He came alone, as promised. He was carrying a small box of my favorite coffee from the specialty shop I liked, which was either a genuine gesture or a calculated one. I accepted it without comment and put a pot on. We sat at the kitchen table. He looked tired. His eyes were set in a way that made him look older than 31, and I noticed, the way mothers notice everything, that he'd lost weight since I'd last seen him properly. "Mom," he said, wrapping both hands around his coffee cup, "I know things have gotten tense. I know Brittany and I know Saturday didn't go well. I'm asking you to please think about what you're doing. Not for her. For me." "What do you need me to think about?" I asked. "We need that payment, Mom. We're stretched. And the baby—" He pressed his lips together. "We're scared. We're having a baby and we're scared. And I need my mother to be part of that." It was the first time he had said he needed me in a very long time. Was it sincere? Was it Brittany's script? Was it both? I found that I could no longer be entirely certain, and that uncertainty was its own kind of grief. What I had once been able to read in my son's face had become partially obscured by someone else's influence, and I did not know how many layers deep that went. "Kevin," I said, "I love you. That has not changed. But I heard what Brittany said to Carol Whitfield at the Riverside Grill." He went very still. "She called me a financial resource they were done needing. She mentioned that her father would replace me as co-signer when the time was right." I looked at him steadily. "Were you aware of that plan?" The answer was in his face before he spoke. A brief, involuntary flicker of something that was not quite surprise. He knew. Maybe not the exact words, but he knew the shape of the plan. "Kevin," I said quietly, "I cannot give money to a household that is planning to dispose of me." He left an hour later without the resolution he'd come for. I watched him go from the kitchen window the way I had watched him go his whole life. After school buses, after first dates, after the morning he'd driven to college. The watching never stopped being hard, but I did not call him back. The following Tuesday, I had lunch with my friend Marjorie Pendleton. We had been friends for 22 years, since our boys were in the same third-grade class, and we'd ended up beside each other at a school bake sale, both of us having made the same lemon bars without planning it. She had been through her own version of family difficulty, a divorce, a daughter who had taken years to come back, and she had the kind of wisdom that comes from having survived things rather than simply read about them. We sat in the back corner of the diner on Elm Street, and I told her everything. She did not interrupt. She did not offer comfort prematurely. When I finished, she sat back and wrapped her hands around her tea. "Do you know what the kindest thing you can do for Kevin right now is?" she said. "What?" Stop making it easy for him to choose her over you without consequences. She said it without cruelty. She said it the way a clear window lets in light. I also called Patricia Greer that week. I wanted to know the timeline for a potential co-signer release. Patricia confirmed that the process would take time. The lenders would need to assess Kevin and Brittany's ability to qualify independently, which, given Brittany's reduced income and the incoming baby expenses, was not a given. In the meantime, Patricia advised me to continue documenting everything and to avoid any financial transfers. You've done the hard part, Patricia told me. Now you wait and you don't flinch. I thanked her. I drove home. I made the lemon bars Marjorie and I had bonded over at that bake sale 22 years ago, ate 2 of them, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. For the first time in a long time, I slept through until morning. They came on a Thursday evening, 10 days after Kevin's solo visit. I was in the living room reading when I heard the knock. 2 knocks, firm, not tentative. I already knew before I reached the door that Brittany was on the other side of it. They stood together on the porch. Brittany was holding a casserole dish covered in foil, which was either the most transparent prop I had ever seen or a genuine effort. Kevin stood slightly behind her, which had become his permanent geographic position in relation to his wife. Dorothy. Brittany smiled, and there was the warmth, the tilted head, the full performance assembled. We thought we'd bring dinner. We wanted to do this properly. I stepped back and let them in. I did not know what else to do with a casserole. There are things you cannot close the door on. We ate in the dining room, which I had not used since Christmas. Brittany had made a chicken and rice bake, which was competently done. She talked about the baby's nursery. They were thinking of a nature theme, woodland animals, and asked my opinion, which was new. Kevin talked about a project at work. The conversation was so normal, it was almost convincing. Almost. After dinner, while I was putting the plates in the kitchen, Brittany appeared in the doorway, without Kevin. Dorothy, she said. Her voice had dropped the dinner party register. Can I say something honest? You can try, I said. She came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. I think we got off on the wrong foot. The conversation I had with you, the one about choices, I said it badly. I was stressed, and I said it badly, and I'm sorry. I turned off the water and dried my hands. Okay, I said, but I need you to understand what's at stake right now. She met my eyes. The apology was already behind her. If you withdraw from the mortgage and we have to refinance without you, we'd be looking at a significantly higher interest rate. That affects us for 30 years. We have a baby coming. I'm asking you, mother to mother. She paused meaningfully on the phrase. To think about what you'd be doing to an innocent child. There it was. Under the casserole and the woodland nursery and the apology, there it was. Brittany, I said, you told a woman in a restaurant that I was a financial resource you were done needing. You discussed replacing me as co-signer with your father. Not a flicker of guilt, only a brief recalibration. Carol Whitfield has misunderstood things before, Brittany said smoothly. She's a gossip. She's a retired schoolteacher who called me out of genuine concern, I said, and she has no reason to invent it. Dorothy, what I may have said in a private conversation is exactly the kind of thing that tells me what you say in private is more honest than what you say in my dining room. Her jaw tightened. Kevin had appeared in the kitchen doorway by now, sensing the shift. But he stayed there, on the threshold, the way he always was. Between us, belonging fully to neither space. Brittany's tone shifted entirely, the warmth gone. Let me be honest then, she said. If you push for the co-signer release and we're forced to sell the house, Kevin's credit takes a hit. He'll resent you for it. I'm telling you that directly because I think you deserve to know what you'd be causing. You're telling me, I said, that my son will be turned against me if I protect my own financial interests. I'm telling you the reality. Brittany, my voice was very quiet. That is a threat. I'd like you to know that I recognize it as a threat. She stared at me. I think she had expected tears, or retreat, or the slow, guilty folding that had characterized my responses for the past 2 years. Instead, she got a 63-year-old woman with a legal pad, an attorney, and 14 months of documented payments, standing at her own kitchen sink. Kevin, I said, looking past Brittany, I love you. I hope you know that. But I'm not going to be held financially responsible for a household that is actively planning to exclude me. That is not something any reasonable person would agree to. Kevin looked at his wife. He looked at me. He made the same choice he always made. Mom, I think Brittany is just trying to... I know what Brittany is trying to do, I said. Good night. They left, this time without a hug at the door. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after I heard the car pull away. My hands were not entirely steady. I will admit that. Brittany's threat, Kevin will resent you, had landed, because it was aimed precisely at the thing I feared most. But I had learned something standing at that sink. Fear and resolve are not opposites. Fear, I was discovering, could be fuel. I went to the living room, sat in my good chair, picked up my book and read until my hands were steady again. Patricia had suggested the meeting 2 weeks earlier, after I relayed the dining room visit. It might be time, she said, to put everything in the same room. She explained what she had in mind. Not a courtroom, not an adversarial proceeding, but a formal sit-down with a family mediator present. Patricia would attend in her capacity as my advisor. The purpose would be to clearly establish the terms under which I would either continue my involvement or formally pursue cosigner release. The value of a structured meeting, Patricia said, is that it creates a record, and people who are accustomed to informal manipulation tend to become very uncomfortable with records. She scheduled it for a Tuesday morning, 11 o'clock, at a mediation office in town. She sent Kevin and Brittany a formal letter of invitation, co-signed by the mediator. The letter was courteous and precise. It described the meeting as an opportunity to reach a mutually agreeable resolution regarding the mortgage cosigner arrangement. Kevin texted me the night before, "Mom, is this really necessary? Can't we just talk?" I replied, "Tuesday at 11. Please be there." I did not sleep easily that Monday night. I lay in my bed on Maple Creek Drive and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the ways a room full of people and documentation could go wrong. I thought about Kevin's face, the way it looked when he was caught between two forces he didn't know how to reconcile. I thought about Brittany, who was smart and quick and had never once in 2 years been put in a room where the rules were not hers to write. I got up at 5. I made coffee. I went through my folder one more time, checking every page, every date, every figure. Not because I doubted them, because thoroughness was the only form of courage I had available to me at 5 in the morning. They were there. Brittany was dressed carefully. A dark blazer, her hair pulled back, her green eyes sharp and prepared. She had brought her own folder of papers, which told me she'd consulted someone, possibly her father, possibly a friend who knew enough about real estate to feel authoritative. Kevin wore his work clothes, which meant he'd taken time off. He looked at me across the table with an expression I couldn't fully read. The mediator, a soft-spoken man named Gerald Cross, opened the meeting by explaining the process. Everyone would speak. Everything would be documented. The goal was resolution, not blame. Brittany looked at the word documented, and I watched something shift behind her eyes. Patricia laid out the core facts without theater. I had co-signed the mortgage 14 months ago. I had voluntarily contributed $1,100 monthly. The relationship had significantly deteriorated. I had sought legal counsel regarding my options. I was now formally requesting either a structured acknowledgement of my contributions and ongoing role, or the initiation of a co-signer release process. Brittany's response came quickly. Dorothy has always been welcome in our home. We've had some communication difficulties. That's normal in any family. We'd love for her to be involved. We're expecting a baby. Gerald Cross nodded and made a note. Mrs. Callahan, he said, turning to me, would you like to respond to that characterization? I would, I said. I opened my own folder. The first page was a printed account from Carol Whitfield, signed and dated, describing what she had overheard at the Riverside Grill. The second page was a timeline of my financial contributions, every transfer documented with bank records. The third was the transcript I had reconstructed of the October conversation, the ultimatum, which I had written down the same night and had Patricia review for accuracy. There was also a fourth page, a record of the November dinner visit, the casserole, and the precise words Brittany had used in my kitchen. Kevin will resent you, dated and written in my own hand the same evening it occurred. I slid copies across the table to Gerald Cross. I slid copies to Brittany and Kevin. Brittany looked at the Carol Whitfield statement. I watched the performance of warmth undergo stress fractures. This is hearsay, she said. Carol Whitfield heard a private conversation out of context and, would you like to describe the context? Patricia said mildly. Brittany stopped. Gerald Cross looked at her. Ms. Hargrove, the statement describes you saying that Dorothy was a financial resource you were done needing, and that you intended to transition to your father as co-signer. Is that characterization inaccurate? It's taken completely out of... Is it inaccurate? Patricia repeated. The green eyes moved to Kevin. It was a fast, reflexive movement, the kind you make when you need an anchor. Kevin was looking at the third page, the reconstruction of the October ultimatum, and he was very still. Kevin, Brittany said, a note of urgency now, below the smooth surface. He didn't look up. She tried a different angle. She turned to Gerald Cross with the composed expression of someone accustomed to winning rooms. I think what's being lost here is the emotional context. Dorothy and I have had a difficult dynamic. That's painful for everyone. But turning it into a legal proceeding that damages the possibility of any real reconciliation. Ms. Hargrove, Gerald said, the purpose of documentation is not to prevent reconciliation. It's to ensure that any resolution is built on accurate, shared information. Brittany's composure thinned just slightly at the edges. Kevin, Brittany said again, a note of urgency now below the smooth surface. Brittany, he said. His voice was quiet and strange, the way voices are when they are working something out while speaking. Did you talk to your dad about replacing Mom on the mortgage? The room went still. I mentioned it as a hypothetical, Brittany said. When? Kevin's voice was still quiet. When was it a hypothetical? Kevin, this isn't the place to... I'm asking you a question, he said. And he looked up from the page and looked at his wife. And in his face, I saw something I had not seen in a very long time. Clarity. Brittany reached for the performance one more time. Dorothy, I think what we all want is a positive relationship. What you're doing right now, these papers, this mediator, this is not the way to get that. It's adversarial. It's going to damage things. Brittany, I said, things were already damaged. I'm just making sure there's a record of how they got that way. She had no prepared response for that. Gerald Cross looked around the table. I think, he said carefully, we may need to give everyone a moment. But Kevin was still looking at his mother. And for the first time in longer than I could accurately calculate, my son was looking at me with something that was not distance, not guilt, not managed affection. He was looking at me the way he used to, the way a child looks at the person who has always told him the truth, recognizing it at last, because it had been withheld long enough. The days after the mediation meeting were not dramatic. Real resolutions, in my experience, rarely are. They are paperwork and waiting rooms and phone calls made during ordinary afternoons. But they were decisive. Gerald Cross issued a formal summary of the mediation session within 5 business days, documenting all parties' positions and the specific financial matters in dispute. It was not a legal ruling, but it was a thorough professional record, the kind that matters when things proceed further. Patricia filed the formal request for cosigner release with the mortgage servicer. Given the documentation we had assembled, the timeline of financial contributions, and the written record of the deteriorated relationship, the servicer acknowledged the request and opened a review. For release to proceed, Kevin and Brittany would need to demonstrate they could qualify for the loan independently. They could not. This was the part Brittany had not calculated carefully enough. Her income, since reducing her hours at the marketing firm, had dropped significantly. The new baby meant additional expenses that would factor into any lender's assessment of their debt-to-income ratio. Kevin's salary was good, but not sufficient alone to absorb the full mortgage at the existing terms. To refinance without a cosigner, they would need a substantially improved financial profile, which they did not currently have. I remember the afternoon Patricia called to tell me the lender's preliminary assessment. I was standing in the backyard, pulling dead growth from the flower beds along the fence line, the work I had let go in the fall. I had my gardening gloves on and soil on my knees, and Patricia's voice was matter-of-fact and clear. "They don't qualify," she said. "Not even close, given Brittany's current income and the baby's projected expenses." I pulled a dead stem from the soil. "And her father." "That's the other thing," Patricia said. And there was the other piece. Brittany's father, the man who had allegedly agreed, in principle, to replace me, turned out to be less able than promised. He had his own mortgage, his own financial obligations, and when an actual lender ran his numbers, he did not qualify as a cosigner either. The plan Brittany had spoken of so confidently in a restaurant, the plan that had meant I was a temporary resource to be managed and then discarded, had not been tested against reality. It had existed only as a story Brittany told to make herself feel more in control. A story she had perhaps even half believed herself, which was its own kind of cautionary detail. Reality, it turned out, had different ideas. I learned this through Patricia, who had maintained a civil professional line of communication with Kevin's own attorney, a young man Kevin had quietly hired in the weeks following the mediation. Kevin hiring his own attorney, separate from Brittany's instincts, was the first sign that the ground between them was shifting. It shifted further in November. Kevin called me on a Sunday, a real call, not a strategic one, and said without preamble, "Mom, I owe you an apology, not for one specific thing, for the accumulation of things, for the chair, for the silence, for the Sunday he'd arrived on my porch and said he was sorry Brittany had said it harshly, as if the harshness were the problem rather than the content." He sat on the other end of the phone and apologized for 2 years of looking at the floor. He said he had known, somewhere beneath the surface of daily life, that things were not right. He said he had told himself it was just adjustment, just the difficulty of merging 2 families, just Brittany's personality, sharp but well-intentioned. He said he had told himself these things because it was easier than looking directly at what was actually happening. "I was a coward, Mom," he said. It was the plainest thing he had said to me in years. I did not make it easy for him, exactly. But I did not make it hard either. I let him speak. I did not perform forgiveness I didn't fully feel yet, because that would have been its own kind of dishonesty. I told him I heard him. I told him I loved him. I told him that love and trust were related but not identical, and that trust was going to need time. He said he understood. He sounded like he meant it. What happened between Kevin and Brittany in the months that followed was not something I orchestrated. Kevin had seen the Carol Whitfield statement. He had heard his wife say the things she'd said, a hypothetical, she'd called it, about her father as co-signer. He had read my reconstruction of the October ultimatum and recognized it as accurate. A man who is presented with a clear picture of the same facts he has been looking at sideways for years does not change immediately. But he changes. By January, Kevin had moved into the spare room of a colleague's house. By February, he had consulted a divorce attorney. He did not ask me how to feel about Brittany. He had stopped needing me to confirm what was in front of him. As for the house, with the co-signer release denied, the lender determined that Kevin and Brittany could not qualify independently, and Brittany's father could not fill the gap. They had a difficult choice. They could find a way to afford the current terms, or they could sell. They sold the house in January. Of the sale, Patricia ensured that my $15,400 in documented contributions was formally recognized. We did not recover every dollar. That would have required a separate civil proceeding that neither Patricia nor I wanted to undertake. But we recovered a meaningful portion, and more importantly, my name came off the mortgage. I was free of it, legally, completely, without remainder. I stood in my kitchen on Maple Creek Drive and held the release documentation. One sheet of paper, unremarkable in appearance, representing a great deal of work and a great deal of pain. I had expected, I think, some large feeling, triumph, or grief, or relief so physical it would bring me to my knees. What I felt instead was quieter than any of that. The particular stillness of something that has been resolved. I put the document in a folder. I placed the folder in the drawer where I kept important papers. I made myself a cup of tea. I drank it at the kitchen table in the quiet of a house that was, and had always been, entirely mine. Then I washed the cup, dried it, put it back in the cabinet, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Spring came to Maple Creek Drive, and I planted tomatoes for the first time in 4 years. I don't know why I had stopped planting them. Somewhere in the years of adjusting and accommodating and managing Brittany's discomfort with my existence, I had let small things like that go. The kind of small things that, added together, constitute a life. The tomatoes were a beginning. I also joined the Thursday afternoon book club at the Clarksville Public Library. I had driven past the sign for it for 2 years without stopping. 7 women, 3 of whom I already knew by sight, one of whom, a retired nurse named Grace, became, in the slow way that adult friendships form, a genuine friend. We argued about books and ate too many cookies and talked about our children without apology or performance. I was happy, not in a simple or uncomplicated way, but in the specific, textured way that happiness arrives when it has been earned through difficulty. Kevin and I saw each other twice a month, then 3 times. We met at a restaurant first. Neutral ground, the way you proceed carefully after something has broken. Then at my house. Then, in late spring, I went to see the apartment he'd rented in the east part of town, a clean 1-bedroom above a dry cleaner's, modest and organized in the way Kevin had always been when left to his own instincts. He was cooking again. He had started running. He slept better, he told me, than he had in 2 years. He said it without drama. He said it the way you say things when you are still a little surprised by them. We did not talk about Brittany constantly. When we did talk about her, we were careful and precise, not given to speeches. Kevin was working through his own reckoning with what had happened and how much of it he had allowed, and that was his work to do, not mine. What I gave him was consistency. Sunday calls. His grandmother's cornbread recipe, written down this time in my own handwriting, in a card I left on his kitchen counter. The baby was born in March, a girl. Kevin named her Ruth after his grandmother, which told me more about where his head had been in the previous months than anything he could have said directly. He brought her to my house on a Saturday in April. She was small and serious-faced, and she fell asleep against my shoulder while Kevin sat across from me at the kitchen table and watched. He looked tired in the way new parents are tired, but also present in a way he hadn't been in years. "Hi, Ruth," I said, very quietly, to the small weight against my shoulder. "I'm your grandmother." I did not cry, which surprised me. I felt too full for crying. It would have been a kind of relief, and what I felt did not need relief. It just needed to be. As for Brittany, I did not follow her life closely, because that was not who I wanted to be. But some things reached me through Kevin, or through Carol, or simply through the circuits of a small town. She stayed in Clarksville initially, in an apartment she rented after the house sold. The marketing position she returned to full-time paid less than she'd expected. She'd been out of full-time work long enough that re-entering at her previous level proved more complicated than anticipated. Her father, who had factored so centrally in her plans, had his own financial strains. The relationship was more complicated than she had presented. She had lawyers for the divorce proceedings, but legal fees are not free. The settlement was not generous to either party because there was not much to be generous with. None of this was what I had planned for her. It was simply what happened when the architecture of a life built on managing other people's resources, rather than building your own, encountered the ordinary weight of reality. The last I heard, through Kevin, she had relocated to her parents' city to be closer to them. Kevin navigated the co-parenting with the kind of quiet, determined care he brought to things he decided to do properly. They were not friendly, but they were civil. Ruth would have both parents. That was what mattered, and Maple Creek Drive continued. The tomatoes came in red and plentiful in August. I made sauce, enough to give jars away, to Marjorie, to Grace, to Kevin, who set the jar on his kitchen counter where I could see it the next time I visited. Small things, the kind of small things that, added together, constitute a life. I was 64 years old, and I had remembered who I was. I learned 3 things from all of this. Love is not a blank check. Kindness without limits is not virtue. It is an open door for people who are looking for one. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to protect them from the consequences of their own choices. If I had kept paying, I would have lost myself to keep the peace. I would have funded my own erasure and called it family. Instead, I stopped. And in the stopping, I found both my son and myself again. I am not a perfect woman, but I am a woman who finally remembered that dignity is not negotiable, not for anyone, and not at any price. What would you have done in my place? If this story spoke to you, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you, truly, for listening.